Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 6th, 2020. I'm going to have a hard time getting used to this one. Maybe I need to set my the clock on the computer desktop to show the year, at least for the next, about 4 weeks until we finally get used to it. All right, ready for our first serious working Monday. Actually, I guess this is, all right, our first serious working Monday of the new year. And I guess it's our only Monday of the new year. And that's how serious we are. We treat every Monday as a serious working Monday. Not everybody entirely back into the swing of things just yet. One of two of our students in residence back at school. Another one with another week off. So exciting times. And we're going to have to interrupt our regular schedule this week with a Wednesday off the air again, which means missing out once again on Joan McCarter, through no fault of her own, who just happens to get caught up in our own personal scheduling issues. Here at Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, lots to catch up on, of course. We managed to close out the week last week with the note on the Soleimani assassination. Just a nice assassination to finish out the week. It was fun and interesting, and we all had a good time. Which is, of course, a horrible, horrible way to discuss what's actually going on, and perhaps the brink of World War III. No one really knows. Things have settled slightly in that they haven't escalated to open warfare throughout the globe at this point. So that's nice. Whenever you can get a short break like that, it's worth hanging on to. And, of course, lots of backlash over the weekend. I think everybody had to know that that was going to be a big topic of conversation over the weekend. Hey, so were the Golden Globes. It was a little difficult to pay attention to the Golden Globes. Not that that's something I usually do, but I was made aware that Ricky Gervais did a fantastic job in opening and closing the show. Hosting it is what he did. That's how, by virtue of which he got to open and close the show. Blistering opening monologue, which is really what you want at one of these things. Good observation made last night that a good thing, and it's surprising really, but a good thing that there's thicker skin, generally speaking, in Hollywood than there is in D.C. Poor Michelle Wolf, banished from polite society for making a joke about the elemental components of the eye makeup used to great effect by the White House spokesperson at the time, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And all of this was terrible, and we never really recovered from it. You know, the way things go in the press here in this country, it's been difficult for them, but it's about time that they wake up to what's going on. Watching them deal with the assassination, watching them deal with Trump's claims at having a list of 52 targets, which he likewise claims is in reference to the 52 hostages held by the Iranians way back when, back in the Trump glory days. I don't have much doubt that he actually remembers that fact correctly, but I do have my doubts about whether or not he got a list. I have my doubts about whether or not he had, as he insisted, doubled down on later in the week, that there were cultural sites on the list. I am not at all certain that he has any real understanding of what constitutes a cultural site. That sounds very much like something that Stephen Miller might have handed him as a gut punch of a line. And I'm also not certain that the military planners were ready to give him a list at all. He may just have thrown that out there. There may be 52 things on it. There may be nothing on it. He may never have gotten the list. He might have gotten the list. He might have gotten the list and not studied it. There's no point. I don't think anybody out there really believes that anybody would seriously hand Donald Trump a list of 52 anything and think that he has had a good look at it. Donald Trump hasn't looked at a list of more than 5 items in 20 years. But, they may have told him there were 52 things. He may have looked at the back page to see how many there were. Honestly, they may have numbered them 1, 2, 3, 52, and it would have worked. Quite honestly, that could easily have pulled the wool over his eyes if you had enough. So we'll catch up with Greg Dworkin, who is here and clicking and clocking in the background because he's got at least, I think, 52 stories of cultural significance to share
42.
with us.
42. That's the answer to everything.
Yes, right. So, of course, we asked Donald Trump what the answer was, and he said 52 because the answer is 42.
Right, exactly.
That's how you get to these things. Maybe 500.
Well, I'll tell you how we get to these things. We get to these things because Trump is a lying idiot, and the scary part is that he's supported by people like Mike Pompeo, who's also a lying idiot. And really, in the end, we all know who Trump is, but the people who are going to go down in history as the sycophants and enablers are really going to be the ones who have the blackest mark on their record.
Cool. One of them is contemplating running for Senate.
Which one?
Pompeo still, I think, flirting with the Kansas run.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe the rapture will come first and he won't have the opportunity. You never know.
Yes. Well.
So let's check out the numbers. We have the MSN Microsoft News daily tracking poll.
All right.
And some interesting stuff on that. Do you support or oppose the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office? Remember, this is the poll that doesn't ask the I word, just the bottom line of what impeachment is, rather than mentioning the I word. And it's also using a slightly different methodology than other polls. So it's not directly comparable, but the time sequence is always interesting. And starting in December 17th, when support for impeachment was at 48, it's now at 55.
Okay. It's more than
to get rid of
52.
him. And opposition remains at 41. So definite support for impeachment that has not moved, even though we've committed an act of war. And you'd expect a little bit of rally around the flag stuff. Again, 2 points about that. First of all, I've made the point on the show last week and before that perhaps with Donald Trump under duress because of impeachment, whatever rally on the Republican side there is to have is already there, so we're not seeing that much more.
Right. Yes, I remember that.
And at the same time, if you're going to have a war-sponsored rally around the flag kind of attitude, you need Democratic leaders to support that. That's what happened in 2003 when everybody was too afraid to say Iraq war's a stupid idea.
Yes.
Afghanistan war was totally supported by like everybody because we got hit and we wanted to hit them, which, is good sentiment, but maybe, in the long run, maybe not the smartest thing, maybe the smartest thing. That's arguable. We'll let the historians deal with that. But going into Iraq instead of Afghanistan and ignoring and abandoning bin Laden at Tora Bora in order to achieve some new American century kind of stuff was incredibly dumb, and we're still paying the price for that. Nonetheless, at the time, Democratic leaders and everybody except some dirty hippies on blogs thought that this was just the greatest idea since sliced bread.
Yes.
And so it was very difficult to raise your voice and say, hey, maybe we should think this through. That's not happening this time. This is not 2003 Redux. The Democrats are not going along with this, and therefore the public remains divided on it, and lots of dissenting voices within the administration are being heard. And for good reason. For example, Donald Trump on Twitter is threatening war crimes by going after cultural sites, as just one example. Mm-hmm. And the professionals in the military and in the administration realize that these are war crimes, and they're not necessarily supportive. More on that in a minute. But back to the numbers. Do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president? There's a disapproval spike. It's now 52. That's the red and blue one that's just below the voting to remove numbers. And approval is 44. So that's not running in his favor. Interestingly, they ask a third question. If the presidential election were held today, who would you vote for? And there's been a spike for the Democrats, now at 51, with Trump at 41. So that's generic Democrat 51, Trump 41. And again, if you look at that particular graph, what's interesting over time is that the Trump support is unwavering. It's like a straight line. But what's happening is that there's been a bit of a spike for the Democrats, and it's coming from the other than the two. So if I didn't like either one, well, I guess I'm going with the Democrat, which is not surprising because Harry Enton pointed out in the last CNN poll, when asked about the 10% of people, and that's about what it is in this poll, 10%, say if the president election were held today, who would you vote for, Trump, the Democrat, or other? Other is about 10%. It's actually running at the moment at 8 because those 2 points have gone to the Democrats. When Harry Enton reviewed the CNN poll and said, okay, 10% of the public doesn't like either one. But in 2016, that vote broke for Trump over Hillary.
Yes, okay, true.
And now it was running like 71% the Democrat, Biden, specifically who was asked, and 9% for Trump. In other words, I don't like either one. Who are you going to vote for? Biden overwhelmingly gets those numbers, very different than 2016. Another reason why when Trump does bad stuff, he's not going to drop his Republican support. What's going to happen is that the people on the fence who otherwise don't like anybody, that's who he loses. And that's why it's so important that we follow this stuff, not just in terms of what the Republican base does. We've said this for years. We know who they are. It's everybody else. And in this particular case, everybody else is everybody else, including those who aren't Democrats.
All right. Well, it is important to check those things. And a good reminder, every time you find yourself discouraged at Trump having done something horrific and there being no change in his base's support for him. And remember, there are fewer of them than there are of everyone else. And not that mattered last time. But,
well, also, the Ipsos 538 poll shows a majority of Americans think the evidence supports Trump removal. There's just a solid 15% who say, I know he's guilty. He did everything we said he did. I'm just not sure that impeachment is the right way to do it. Maybe I don't understand impeachment. Maybe I think it's best left to the voters. What could possibly go wrong between now and the election that we can't just wait it out?
Sure.
And then Trump says, oh, well, I could start a war with Iran.
Yes.
And then that 15% says, oh.
Yeah. Well, some of them anyway.
Well, again, you're not going to get unanimity on anything.
Well,
but
why not?
If you put those two things together, the people who think he did something wrong but weren't so keen on impeachment because what could go wrong between now and the election, and those who are looking at what he's doing with Iran, and you put them together and you say, all right, look, impeachment is not my first choice, but I'm not going to argue with you if you go ahead and remove him.
All right, I will take that.
And I will take that. I mean, that's exactly right. You can't have, okay, everybody totally agrees with the Democrat. That's not what we're looking for here.
I would take it if it's offered.
Now, here's a little bit of a counterpoint and kind of an interesting thing to throw in the mix.
All right.
And this is by Sean Malkowee and Brian Schaffner, currently running in the New York Times opinion section.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to give it to you. It's the last one here. There we have it. How Democrats can win back Obama-Trump defectors. I was going to talk about that later, but it seems to fit in right now with what we're talking about. So let's do it.
Let's go to a diner.
Right now. Bring it. Okay. They don't have to lose their souls to do it. Just the opposite. To understand the potential ramifications of Obama-Trump voters in 2020, it's worth understanding how they voted in 2018. Among those who voted, 3/4 stuck with the Republican Party, but Democrats won back about a fifth, which would amount to a net swing of about 1.5 million votes.
All right. There's a lot of people in this country.
While the idiosyncratic governing style of Trump may have been one key factor in bringing Obama-Trump voters back into the Democratic fold, it wasn't the only reason. Yes. It's true that most Obama-Trump voters who stuck with the Republican Party in 2018 strongly approved of the job Mr. Trump was doing as president, but interestingly, even half of those who flipped back to the Democrats at least somewhat approved of Trump. Democrats won back a significant share of Obama-Trump voters, not because the voters disliked Trump, but in spite of the fact that many approved of him.
Okay.
Right? Instead, these voters appeared to be drawn back to the Democrats by some of the party's bread and butter issues and in spite of others. It's a fancy way of saying You have to be for something. You can't just be against something.
Okay,
well, the Democrats are for stuff, and you know what? People like that, and that's one of the reasons why they vote for Democrats. It's just good to remind ourselves of that. It's not all about anti-Trump, although that's such a huge component. And these Obama-Trump voters are a relatively small slice of the electorate. On issues like gun control, health care, the environment, these voters look remarkably like Democrats, those who voted for Obama and Clinton. And a Democratic House candidate in 2018. 84% of Obama-Trump voters who voted for Democratic House candidates in 2018 want to ban assault rifles compared to 92% of the Democratic base. That's pretty good. 57% of Obama-Trump voters who stayed with the Republicans sought an assault weapons ban. I mean, even the Trump voting group in this particular category still like what the Democrats are doing. Medicare for All is surprisingly popular among all Obama-Trump voters, but especially those who voted for Democrats in 2018. 83% of those who switched back to the Democratic Party support Medicare for All, nearly as high as 93% support the policy achieves among the most solidly blue Democratic voting bloc. These patterns show that Democrats can win back Obama-Trump voters by focusing on issues that also appeal to their base, like climate change. Notably, the Obama-Trump voters who returned to the Democratic Party in 2018 look less like the Democratic Party base in other ways. This is where it gets important. Majority support building a border wall. A majority support the ban on immigration from predominantly Muslim countries. So the Obama-Trump voter is basically the proverbial Reagan Democrat from Macomb County in Michigan back in the day. They sort of like Democrats on bread and butter economic issues, but they really are culturally conservative, and you're never going to get them to move away from that.
Although
so
it is
you either have to make room in your party for it, or you have to overcome that by offering something else that still makes them vote for you.
It's interesting that cultural conservatism now includes assault weapons ban. It's an
old
old thing.
That's out. I mean, the NRA has lost that argument.
Yeah,
the politicians haven't yet. But just as we've won the argument on impeachment, we just have to see it play out because the public is convinced that Trump did something wrong. The public is also convinced that the NRA stance on Second Amendment rights is wrong.
Yes. Okay,
just
good.
The politicians aren't there yet, but the public is there, which is helpful for the future.
Yes.
So at the same time that these culturally conservative folks like the idea of a wall, they probably don't understand what it does and how that changes things. Okay, 2/3 of the voters support deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, which allows the children of undocumented immigrants born in the U.S. to receive deferred action on deportation.
Okay.
So you can get them. You want to talk to them about that? That's what you focus on. Don't focus on the wall. Don't focus on how horrible it is that we're restricting Muslim immigration. Concentrate on kids in cages, DACA, things that people agree on. And healthcare. You do those things, that's how you get those folks to vote for you. Now, the problem is they have very unprogressive attitudes about race and gender. You have to do this in a way that does not abandon what Democrats believe on. That's why it's so tricky. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, fine. We'll run a white guy. That's about as subtle a message as I'll give to you.
All right.
But the rest, you got to vote with us. Now, that's going to make people very uncomfortable if you do that. But what if it turns out that that's what the voters want anyway? I didn't say that we had to run a white guy, but the white guy's winning.
Yes.
Even if it's Bernie.
True. He's even whiter.
So, these are the things that you have to juggle. You have to be cognizant of who your base is and not abandon them. But when you're going after these particular voters, you have to emphasize some things and de-emphasize other things without giving up what you stand for.
Yes.
Also known as Politics 101.
Oh, well, then there should be a way. If only there were a way to advertise only to some people who believe some things, but then
these remobilized Obama non-voters also not only share similar views with the Democratic Party's based on health care, but they have similar views in immigration and share progressive views on race and gender relations. So in other words, there's two pools here, as we know. There's the Obama-Trump voter that you're trying to get with economic issues, and they're the voted for Obama, but I didn't vote this time people. And when non-Biden fans, when people who want somebody other than Biden tell you, we're going to lose because if Biden is elected, he doesn't excite the base, the people, the voters. What they're talking about are people who voted for Obama, but who really didn't feel like voting for Clinton and sort of dropped out. So that's a separate pool from the Obama Trump voter. It's the Obama, then I didn't vote. And that particular pool is much more amenable to just sticking with, things like the Kavanaugh hearings were a sham, and Harvey Weinstein's a bad guy, and Jeffrey Epstein represents everything that's bad. And if you hit on those issues, that's going to strike a chord with the Obama then didn't vote group, but probably turn off the Obama Trump group, who really want to concentrate on healthcare and not this quote other stuff, end quote. So again, it's in a big, giant, complex country. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but these are the things that folks running for president have to juggle. And the Democratic Party has to juggle it. And it's just, that's what happens when you have a big tent. So it's interesting to hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over the weekend say something along the lines of, maybe it's too big a tent. In any other country, I wouldn't be in the same party with Joe Biden, but this is America, so here we are.
Well, you'd be in
I was not happy with that. I think that's kind of dumb. And it's especially dumb in an election year.
Yeah, she may be okay in
she'll be fine where she is, but what about everybody else?
I don't know. Who cares? I guess is one way of looking at it. And I understand her comment, and the answer is, in another country you'd be in coalition with them instead.
But so, I'm not just dismissing it. The fact of the matter is, whether you're looking at Chapo's Trap House or the Young Turks or whatever, there is a strong contingent of democratic socialists who feel like they're slightly different than the rest of the Democrats, if they're Democrats at all, and in a different country would simply be, the Green Party or some different party some different entity than Democrats.
Yes.
But in a two-party system, they're kind of shoehorned in. And so, we're always wrestling with, well, how do you make everybody happy?
I don't view it.
Sometimes you can't.
As substantively different. I mean, to me, I understand where she's going, and I understand how people in multi-party democracies feel about their attachment to party, but
it may not be a large contingent. But we're talking about Bernie or bust people. We're talking about people who say my candidate or nobody else. We're talking about, well, if my candidate doesn't win, then I'll vote for Trump. There is a substantial portion. Now, I don't mean like overwhelming. It's certainly a small minority relative to everybody else, but substantial in terms of total numbers. Who feel that way. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And that's why I'm not saying anything other than recognize that they exist rather than just say, oh, well, there aren't any of those people. There aren't.
I hear them. They exist. AOC is one of them. And I think if she may very well have thought through the whole thing, but only got one line out. But it would be great. To me, it's a teaching moment where you say, if you lived in a multi-party democracy, here's what you would do about it. And the answer, by the way, is not vote for the head of the party that you have nothing in common with to teach a lesson to the other party. The lesson is you say, well, in a multi-party system, I'd be able to sort out my preference by voting for my party. I don't have that here, so I'm going straight to the coalition step. Where do I really belong? And AOC knows the answer. She ran as one.
Right. So in the end, this is how you tie all this together. This is, again, from the McElwee piece. Following the 2016 presidential election, the Wesleyan Media Project reported that Mrs. Clinton campaign aired fewer issue-based ads than any other presidential candidate since they started collecting the data in 2000. Perhaps Democrats learned a lesson from 2016. In 2018, the Wesleyan researchers found that Democratic campaign ads were laser focused on issues like health care, which was the focus of more than half of the ads run by Democratic candidates. Our data suggests that this approach helped bring many Obama-Trump voters back into the Democratic column while remobilizing many Obama voters to turn out and vote Democratic again in the midterm election. So in other words, you got both pools by focusing on health care and bread and butter issues. So they conclude by saying, though there's a temptation to focus on Mr. Trump's personality,
which
like
sucks.
He's a lying, cheating weasel and doesn't deserve to be anywhere near Washington's official capacity. We all know that, and he needs to be impeached. That's background. What they're saying is, if Democrats continue to learn from these elections, they'll focus this year's campaign on plans to address issues like healthcare, wages, and the environment, lest the Obama-Trump voter become Obama-Trump-Trump voter in 2020. And that's what we've seen in the debates and also the way that the Democratic field is campaigning. They really spend not that much time hitting on Trump. They don't have to.
Okay.
Everybody knows who Trump is.
And Trump will hit on
okay,
you.
fine. He's terrible. What are you going to do for me? They are focusing on that. At least they're attempting to. And again, I would make the subtle distinction that there's a difference between issues and policy. I'm for the environment is much better than here's my 72-point plan as to what the environment's all about.
Yes. Voter
Nobody's going to read it.
wise. Yeah, not even me. That's bad.
It is bad. So,
Okay.
I mean, just basic principles about where you stand. That's very important. The specific policy about how you get there, I thought that Elizabeth Warren's I have a plan for that was great because you don't even have to read the plan. You just know she has a plan for that.
True.
Now, when you do read the plans, things start to fall apart a little bit, like with are you for Medicare for all or are you not?
There's other plans.
And that's really hurt her campaign. So, again, issues, yes. Policy, be careful.
Okay. Well, you know, sometimes the plans get better as things go on. Or go read another plan.
Well, we always steal the best of them by the end. That's
That
why
is
I'm not
true.
so worried.
Okay. Well, yeah. By the time people
The
get
winner
around to
steals the
finding
best
time,
of the losers, is what I'm saying.
If people read the plans at any point, I guess it's later.
Yes.
Okay, plenty of time to steal away, and lots of people to steal from still, but fewer every day, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we'll do War and Peace after the break.
Okay, but we've got plenty of time. It's a long book, I understand.
Yep.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. War and Peace was the next subject, as I recall. It's a very long book. If you haven't read it, there's still time in the next segment. But how did we want to cover it today?
Well, we'll talk about some stuff. Okay, let's just start with the New York Times attempting to cover the fact that Pompeo lied about Trump's motivation for killing Soleimani.
All right.
Nobody thinks he was a good guy. This is not defense of him, just defense of killing him in the sense that if you don't really think through what you're doing, maybe that's not so smart.
He's killing guys like it's free.
Yeah, let's take out Kim. What could go wrong? Let's do Putin next.
Well,
New York Times still trying to both sides this, I wrote this morning. Analysis, Trump's Iran strategy backfires, they say. President Trump thought the nuclear deal was flawed because restrictions on Iran would end after 15 years. Now Iran has declared the limits over after less than 5. Congratulations. 3 of those are on your watch. Trump's burden, proving this is not the moment his critics predicted. President Trump has dismissed criticism about his Iran actions as partisan blowback from adversaries too timid to take strong action against enemies. So they can't even bring themselves to the fact that he's lying about his motivation and virtually everything else. Now, this is in the context of that. Let me just read you the headlines of 2 articles. This one's in The Atlantic by Peter Nicholas. Trump cultivated his own credibility crisis on Iran. The president can't assume the Americans will accept what he says is true. And then from the Washington Post, why lying about an imminent attack would matter. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and State Department subordinates vigorously argued Friday that the justification for killing Iranian general and terrorist leader Qasem Soleimani was intelligence, that an attack was imminent. Of course, on Fox News, they're saying you have to believe the intelligence because you know our intelligence community. So there's things that they know that we don't. So you just have to trust Trump because, we totally believe the intelligence community.
Yes, he's big on that.
Really?
When he is. And then on other occasions when he's not, then he isn't.
Right. Now, Pompeo also vigorously claimed on the Sunday shows that Trump really didn't mean it in his tweet when he said he's going after Iranian cultural sites.
Oh.
If they retaliate, he will retaliate by blowing up a list of 52 Iranian cultural sites, a list he undoubtedly got from General Hannity, if not from Stephen Miller.
I don't think.
And so, the problem is, of course, Trump said, of course we are.
Yes. Because
he went and interviewed right after Pompeo said it. He did an interview and said, of course, that's what we're doing.
Right. He said it, and then Pompeo said, no,
so Pompeo's a liar.
Right. Well, that's true.
And Trump is a liar. That's the point here. Why lying about an imminent attack matters? Because you can't believe anything they say. Now, this is a pro-Iranian in the sense that as part of the National American Iranian Council, Reza Marashi, but I don't totally know where he's coming from in terms of his own leanings, but he has a fascinating thread. Let me just read it to you because it fits with everything else we're hearing. Over the past few days, I've spoken extensively with career U.S. government officials as they've worked around the clock to try to mitigate the damage from Trump's ineptitude on Iran. With their permission, I'm sharing a small taste from our lengthy conversations. Enjoy. Quote, these are all quotes now. We have no functional national security decision-making process in place. We have no plan for what comes next. They're woefully unprepared for what's about to pop off, and they're too stupid to realize it. People here are freaking out, and rightfully so. Another one. We're still trying to dig out from underneath the last war choice, and now they're trying to start a new one. I finally cracked open that bottle of scotch you got me. I'm going to call you later tonight to talk through this so I can go into meetings tomorrow armed with some sane talking points to insert into this cluster F. When did most of us find out about killing Soleimani? Different quote. After it already happened. Since then, we've been trying to cobble together contingency planning on the fly, but these charlatans ignore most of it, and then Trump does more stupid stuff that puts us back at square one. All he cares about is crapping on Obama's legacy. I'm not using the actual words. Sucking up the donors and distracting from impeachment. None of this is about American interests or security. He's surrounded by ideological lunatic sycophants like Pence and Pompeo, and they're far from the only ones. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So many of Trump's top advisors on Iran are military vets who served multiple tours of duty in our wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. They believe to their core that Iran is the reason why they lost those wars, and they're dead set on payback no matter what it takes. They've been pushing to kill Soleimani for years, and they finally baited Trump into it. Okay? So I don't take advice from people who pronounce it Iraq.
Oh, all right.
I just don't, okay? Just because you were there doesn't mean you're an expert in the area. You went over there not knowing the difference between Sunni and Shia and screwed everything up. So don't tell me you're now an expert. If you're thinking that this is all about payback and revenge, and that's as far as you've thought, and you haven't thought the next steps, including Iran dropping out of the nuclear agreement early, threatening Israel, threatening instability in the Mideast, encouraging and inciting attacks on American forces all over the world, and with the direct immediate consequence of Iraq voting, not a binding vote, but voting to kick American troops out of the country in a unanimous vote in their parliament. I mean, how do you trade killing Soleimani for we got kicked out of the Iraq areas and therefore we have to shut down the fight against ISIS as a win? That makes us
stay
safe.
Tuned. It just does.
Yeah. Well, you just have to trust them because they know more than we do, right? When I used your points, another quote about Soleimani's murder being a catalyst for Iranians to rally around the flag, they said that was Obama's apologist bullshit, and the Soviet Union forced people against their will into public displays of support, so apparently Iran's a superpower now.
Oh, okay. And the Soviet Union, that.
Well, that's the way they did it, right? So the fact that everybody in Iran who was having internal disagreements to the point where the government was starting to kill their own people, and we turned that around and made them all rally against us, is a good move because fill in the blank. Yeah. Trump is threatening war crimes against Iran, and none of his top advisors have the courage to publicly oppose it. Instead, they act like cowards and go on background with journalists to express their opposition. They should all resign. They don't deserve to serve this country.
Yeah, well.
Last year, if you had asked me whether American institutions are durable enough to prevent a Trump-led war in Iran, I would have said absolutely. Today, I'm not so sure. For as bad it looks to you all on the outside, it's even worse when you see it from the inside.
Okay.
Here's a provocative one. One of Trump's top Iran advisors got suckered into a honey trap, had their laptop iPhone stolen, and hacked before they woke up, and the White House refused to take precautionary measures regarding their security clearance. Ladies and gents, I give you the Trump administration.
Oh, I don't know.
Uncorroborated, just intriguing.
May not even have anything to do with this, but
in conclusion, yes, folks, it really is that bad. I'm but a humble messenger of truth, the voice of the voiceless. That is all. You may now return to your regularly scheduled programming. If even a quarter of that is true, I don't know, but it happens to fit with other things that other people are saying from other sources besides this guy, which I have to, since I don't know him, I have to say a suspect. But still, if look, people are upset about this. This is not the direction they want to go. And Jim Sciutto and other, down the middle reporters are pointing out that there's a lot of dissent in the Trump administration about, for example, targeting the cultural sites. So we know that the whole thing is a poorly thought out mess. And the bottom line is, as Jack Schaefer points out on Twitter, reminder, American officials lie about war.
Yes, true. They do.
Don't trust liars, especially about matters of war and peace, writes Fox Matthew Iglesias.
What? Oh, Vox. It's like, what? He moved to Fox? That's crazy.
Vox, the voice.
V, got it.
Right. Today's a day, says David Frum, where the most untruthful administration in U.S. history will wish its statements could be believed.
Yes. Again, that is David Frum. He's right.
But he's right.
Yeah, but
okay, let me tell you this. You're my friend. I have a lot of friends who give up on what they did 10 years ago. Forget it. Look at what they're saying now. Give it up.
It's worth a look.
Right? Now, if they go back and say, at the time I said, fine, hit him.
Yeah.
Look at what they're saying. Look at John Dean. John Dean, before he turned, states information, wasn't a good guy.
Yes.
He's a hero now.
I only bring it up because the particular topic, this is what administrations do when they want to go to war.
He should know.
Well, I know. That's true. And
Nicole Wallace should know.
I appreciate it for that reason.
They saw what happened.
And but I feel like I do want to make that caveat. Is I understand that that's what they do. I understand that because you did that once.
Yes.
And I appreciate the perspective.
And I don't wrong. Think that some of them have actually said that. I'm just saying.
I don't think that's wrong.
I know who David Frum is. Acts as a people guy. He was partially responsible for getting us here. I get that.
Well, yeah.
But look at the difference between him and Ari Fleischman.
I don't see. Well, yeah, okay. Ari Fleischman has never come around, so that's
right.
True. But I just dismiss him out of hand. I'm saying, I take this guy's point, and I maybe enough. Right now to say he
just
knows very well.
Find somebody else you like who made this.
He knows very well that this is what they do because he did it, and boy did he do it! Now I'm done.
Speaking of Nicole Wallace, who was partially responsible for Sarah Palin, there are all sorts of rumors flying around that she's going to replace Chuck Todd.
Oh well. Oh yes,
that
right.
Her hour is going to expand to 2 hours, and Todd's going to be gone from daily. He'll just do Meet the Press on Sunday. Still be the political director.
Honestly, that's all he really probably needs. And
it's probably a good idea because the show is awful. It doesn't get good ratings. And whenever he interviews somebody, he never goes with a follow-up question. Like, for example, when he had Pompeo on the weekend on Meet the Press.
Yes.
And Todd said, are you worried about blowback and bad things happening because of this in terms of Americans? Well, there'll be some wind. There'll be some breeze. And he never went up with a follow-up and said, well, what are you talking about? How many's too many? 5, 10 deaths, 20? 50, 100?
Mm-hmm.
What do you consider noise? Right. What's collateral damage? He never asks those questions. He just moves on and asks something else. Never, never, never does he hit them. If somebody gives him complete garbage like Kellyanne Conway, truth is truth, or Rudy Giuliani stuff, he never goes back and says, but what do you mean by that? How could you say that? What about this? Chris Wallace does that. Look at the difference between the way they interview. And Wallace is on Fox. Yeah. And Chuck Todd is on NBC. And Wallace is 1,000 times better in interview.
Seems that way, doesn't it? I don't know where the idea came from that you didn't have to follow up, although I will say occasionally I do see the futility, but then there's the futility. That just leads you to the conclusion that it's futile to have that person on, and he never gets to that point. So, even though there's an excuse, well, if I ask him a follow-up question, he just dodges. Well, right, but then don't interview him.
Right.
Oh.
So, you have that annoying spot when people like David Frum say something and you go back and say, yeah, but at the time you were young, I will not forget that. I have an annoying spot.
All right.
For people who ever say, this is horrible, this is terrible, this is morally bankrupt, this is the worst possible thing a human can, but it's working. When people say that, I really want to pour cold water on them.
I'm not certain where that's coming from.
Or worse. But people say that, well, it's politics, Yes, I understand that this is bad and you shouldn't put children in cages, but look at those poll numbers.
Okay.
You're missing the point. You're focusing on horse race, and you're not looking at the overall big picture. Australia's burning. It's on fire. Yes, but look how the Green New Deal polls.
I guess.
I mean, come on.
That would be particularly bad.
Half a billion animals are dying. Koalas are dying. Even if you don't care about people, what about the animals?
That's true.
But look at how the Green New Deal polls.
I don't get it, but okay.
Well, can you focus on the bigger picture instead of this tiny little thing that you've decided is your niche? And if you can't, why don't you have somebody else do it?
I don't know. Well, that's an odd one.
That's my rant for today.
Okay.
I will be very happy to see Chuck Todd go, if in fact that happens. And Nicole Wallace, who was a Sarah Palin Bush supporter back in the day, is doing a great job, and I forgive her.
Okay. I mean, there's forgiveness.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. There's forgiveness, and there's forgiveness, but also I remember that so that we can.
Yes. Well, there's a saying, I think I told you this years ago, in the surgical community. Okay. It's not forgive and forget. It's forgive and remember.
Okay. Why is
right?
that?
I forgive you for that.
Community?
But I'm going to remember that you did that. So the next time this comes up, there may be consequences to that.
That could be true.
Right? I forgive you. You're just not getting this promotion.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I don't see why.
But I forgive you.
Right. That doesn't mean it's erased.
Right.
I'm just not terminating you.
Right. Exactly.
I think that's fair. That's a good place to land. And I mean, there's of course, there's gradations all along the way. What can you do? I mean, some of the things that you forgive, some of them required an enormous amount of forgiveness. Some not so much. Oh yeah, that's a mistake. You made that mistake. That I really cannot contemplate how you ever got there and question your sanity. I see you're doing better now. Good for you. Is it medication, therapy? What is it? In either case, if push comes to shove and I find somebody who can handle the case better, I might go that way.
Right. So I'm going to leave you with something completely different.
All right.
Okay. And I just thought it was fun. One of my very good friends brought this to my attention, listening to the show. One of our loyal fans and listeners.
10 years ago, he was a jerk, but go on.
It's called cooperative overlap in conversation. In conversation analysis, the term cooperative overlap refers to a face-to-face interaction in which one speaker talks at the same time as another speaker to demonstrate an interest in the conversation. Does this sound familiar?
Yes.
In contrast, an interruptive overlap is a competitive strategy in which one of the speakers attempts to dominate a conversation.
Aha.
Right?
Unintelligible.
Right? Cooperation or interruption. Cooperative overlap occurs when an interlocutor is showing her enthusiastic support and agreement with another. Cooperative overlap occurs when the speakers view silence between turns as impolite or a sign to lack of rapport.
Ah.
Or as we used to say in New York, of course I'm listening. That's why I'm interrupting.
What would I be interrupting you about?
I'm
if
in
I
New York.
wasn't listening?
That's how it works.
Right.
If I'm not interrupting, it means I'm not listening.
That is true.
Different cultural perceptions of cooperative overlap. The two-way nature of cross-cultural differences typically eludes participants in the throes of conversation. A speaker who stops talking because another has begun is unlikely to think, I guess we have different attitudes. Instead, a speaker will probably think, you're not interested. You only want to hear yourself talk. And the cooperative overlapper is probably concluding, well, you're unfriendly and making me do all the work here.
This needs to have a letter in the various psychological profile whatchamahoozies, I guess. The am I introvert, extrovert, cooperative?
Exactly.
Or...
It's the same sort of thing. And I'm laughing because I found this other one here. Interrupters. Linguists say it's the Jewish way.
Wait a minute. Is that Brett
The next
Stevens?
time somebody accuses you of interrupting, you might want to explain you're not being rude. You're engaging in high involvement cooperative overlapping. You see? That's what I'm doing, David. I'm not interrupting you. I'm not letting you not talk on your own show. This is all about like being cooperative and friendly.
True. Again, don't let Brett Stevens hear about this.
Right. Now, it's not a precise term. Not all Jews exhibit its characteristic features, and not all people who exhibit them are Jewish.
Of course not.
But the pattern of conversation found among many Jews from New York, especially those of Eastern European origin, differs in significant ways from non-Jewish Americans from the South, Midwest, and the West. I always have to explain to people in Connecticut, I'm not being rude. I'm interrupting because I'm listening.
Well, it does make sense. I'm engaged in what you're saying. I want in.
Right. In a conversation among Jews, participants find the simultaneous talk and quick turn-taking unremarkable. They interpret silences and pauses as evidence of lack of rapport. But those not accustomed to that style may see such active listening behaviors as rudeness, verbal hogging, and lack of interest in the speaker. The very characteristics that promote good conversation among the in-group can create discomfort or hostility among mixed groups.
Yes.
So that's why I interrupt you, and I'm not apologizing. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think of it not
Who
so
asked?
much as
I'm saying
cooperative overlap as the West Wing witty banter model.
Well, I just think of it
silence.
as like when you and I have breakfast at various and rare occasions that we do. This is how we actually interact in real life.
Yeah, it's not an act, and it would be impossible to pull off if it wasn't real, and you couldn't see the other person. I think.
Right. If we could, then we'd be on the Golden Globes getting.
Right.
So let's bring that full circle to where you started, and that's really the end of my segment here. I just thought it was interesting.
I do think it's interesting.
And I thank the listener for bringing it to our attention.
And I know you will not identify this listener. I
will
it's not press
fair.
You about this.
They didn't ask to be identified. They just wanted to bring out the point and also point out because they listen and understand what's going on here. They love the banter.
Yes, they just had a hard time sending
Shut
that
up,
article.
I'm talking.
I've been trying to email you this for years, and you won't let me. Email works. All right.
I have an unlisted email. Besides, it's not your turn yet. Anyway, that's the story. War and Peace, big deal. You can't believe anything Trump says. He's getting us in a bad situation. People behind the scenes are very unhappy. It'll be quite interesting to see what happens now. This is not 2003. You're not going to have the whole country saying, if you have any doubts about this war, shut up. It's the patriotic thing to do. We're in a different time, in a different place with a different leader. So thanks so much for listening, folks. This is our cooperative discussions with David Waldman and myself here on Kagro in the Morning. After all, it is his show. And I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again, I'm sure.
All right.
Because this is how we always do it.
Yeah, so we'll have to tinker with our schedule, unfortunately, but you'll be back. I can promise you
I'll
that.
be back. What's going on Wednesday?
Wednesday, we're going to have to do some doctor's appointment shuttling for many members of the household.
Thursday? Is Thursday open?
Thursday is on, I guess, unless we all things go horribly wrong, I suppose. Or
well,
Trump
if we can't do lunch, let's do virtual breakfast.
Yes, terrific. I think Thursday should be fine, and there will be no problems. I just have to do the shuttling at this point.
Well, see you then.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg. Lots to discuss here, lots to wrap up with. I keep thinking about the from thing, just because that ended up being one of the comments on the way out the door, I guess. about it not being like 2003. And so then it, of course, struck me because I'm instructed to drop it. So can I do that? And of course not. But I'm thinking now, it's not 2003. It won't be the same pressures. That's a very important point, and I'm thrilled that there are so many people who won't let it be like 2003. That's when it struck me that it was like, well, one of the people who made 2003 is David Frum. The good news is that one of the people, that guy is on the other side now, so that's good. So maybe that's part of the reason that it's not going to be 2003. And I don't think that they've found anybody as capable of shutting down debate as he was with that line and in cooperation with others. They had a much better team of debate quashers last time than they do now. That's definitely true. And there's a lot more people who have confidence in their ability to get it right off the bat. That's true. The only thing I guess that was disturbing me as I was thinking it through was, well, I don't understand. It's like David Frum gets to be on the winning side twice here, even though he was horribly wrong once and has become right this time by following our path on the way to correctness. And I don't know. I feel like we should get a solo win on this somehow, but I can't really. People are at risk of death, and I suppose I can't really be too concerned about points at this point. So that'll be the way I come around to dismissing the idea that I ought to reject anything David Frum says, no matter whether it's on our side or not, at this stage of the game. But it does. So noted. Right. And I'm sure, quite honestly, at the end of the day, probably on this point, if you expressed it that way, I'm sure David Frum would say, I don't need the credit for stopping Trump on this. There's nothing I can trade it for right now that I don't already have. So go ahead. Take the credit. Not that it's really on offer for anybody anyway. But I just find that sort of interesting. Also, to the point, Bill comments on Nicole Wallace's transformation. If I recall correctly, he says, Nicole Wallace's transformation away from the dark side started during the 2008 presidential campaign and not after. Is that right? When you realize something is very wrong while you're in the middle of it, that's a bit different than speaking up years later. Well, I would say that is a difference, right? I mean, I'll take it when I can get it. That's true. Would I want David Frum still mired in that way of thinking? In some cases he is, but would I want that overall? I guess not. If I believe that he was effective in creating that atmosphere in which it was impossible to dissent and be taken seriously, although I still think we're kind of in that situation anyway, but perhaps to a lesser extent, then yeah, I don't want him on that team. It may have been coincidence. He may have stumbled onto that one line for which he's famous and not much else. But he's been pretty persuasive, arguing against Trump all along, and been pretty persuasive and interesting to watch on the gun issues as well. Everybody's a mix. We're complex people. I won't let it take up too much more of my time, and consequently, not too much more of yours either. Coming up, of course, on our next break, but not quite yet. Let me see what, if anything, we might be able to throw in there for discussion before departing. See, the problem is too many big stories, I guess. Although, let's see. Here's something I was wondering about. I mean, the story itself is probably too long to read all the way through, but I'd like to make mention of it. But we'll probably have to continue it on the other side. It's a good place to kick off because Charlie Savage and Eric Lipton teaming up in the New York Times, usually something good. I was wondering why they weren't doing this more. White House withholds 20 emails between two Trump aides on Ukraine aid. I know that's a little difficult because of the word aid, but AIDS, two Trump aides, withholding their emails on aid, AID, to Ukraine. And I've been wondering about this since we did find time, I think, on Friday to discuss the vast trove of emails that were somehow, that we didn't figure out exactly from the article how they became available in unredacted form, but they did. They were sought in unredacted form through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, but they came out redacted, and then somehow Just Security got a hold of them unredacted, and it's still not clear how, and they were very revealing. And in particular, they were revealing of additional crimes by the Trump administration. The most interesting and furthest outlying from all of this, and the one that's got the least attention, is that it would be against the law for the Department of Justice to have improperly redacted all of these emails. There was a FOIA request, and there was no legitimate national security concern backing up their redaction decisions. They are the type of redaction decisions that judges like to explicitly reject when there are lawsuits on the question. They were redactions to prevent political embarrassment and nothing else. So I don't know if we'll ever get to that level where we're actually, enforcing that rule against anybody. We have a difficult time enforcing rules against people, even when they're egregious breaks with internationally recognized norms. I mean, the weekend example of that, of course, everyone wondering about what are we going to do about Trump's threat of war crimes, and people reminding us that even the threat of war crimes is itself perhaps considered a war crime, or certainly could be. And what are we going to do about it? And who will be able to hold Trump to account for these war crimes? And, of course, unfortunately, the answer is nobody. I mean, unless things go horribly wrong for the United States of America, and I don't know if anybody really wants to put all their chips on that, but the people who get to hold people accountable for war crimes are the people who conquer the war criminals. That's generally the way it works out. You want to enforce the war crimes? Call the war police, I guess. Who's that? Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So many things to round up. Let me, let's see. I guess the thing to do is to head back to the New York Times article about White House withholding 20 emails, having commented on the ones that were released redacted and then somehow became unredacted and what they revealed to us. I have wondered from time to time, and not all that often out loud, because I don't want them to hear this, why isn't, I guess I would expect the Trump administration to more often be destroying these emails or attempting to destroy these emails. And I understand it's difficult to do and to erase all evidence that that the emails ever existed is perhaps virtually impossible, but it does require a pretty targeted forensic examination of things in order to dig them up. You have to, raise enough interest, public interest, to push to recover them. So I'm just curious about why they're not being destroyed. It may be that they are too many of them, too high in volume, and nobody has the time, essentially, to go through all this stuff and track it all down and try and destroy it, particularly if it's not even possible to do. So I guess the next best thing in their minds would be just don't obey FOIA laws. Just don't turn things over. Whether that's just simply defying the order outright, or I guess probably the better move for dragging things out appears to be what they ended up doing here. We will respond to the FOIA lawsuit. If we lose, we'll respond to the judge's order to release materials. We just won't release all the materials. You're supposed to. There are penalties for not doing it, but nobody ever enforces those penalties, particularly against, the highest ranking federal government officials. There's just nothing that courts do with respect to defiance of FOIA requests, FOIA lawsuits even. that frightens people into believing that they'll spend time in prison. So you would expect to see this from somebody like Trump or an administration like the Trump administration. You would expect to see that they would search through the emails and say, I found 100 relevant documents. Let's take a look at them. All right, these are all, whatever. They're not that damning. What's funny is that, they might think that some of these things are not that damning, but they really are, because they don't always understand exactly what they're handing over. But they redact a couple of them. And others, they say, now this is nuclear. You cannot let anybody see this. Apparently, up to 20 of them. And they just say, yeah, don't release that. If we find 100, they're not going to know we found 100 unless we say anything. Why would we say so? If we turn over 90, you asked us for all the information. We found 90 emails. That's a lot. And if we don't know that there was 100, you don't know to press for them. You don't know that you can ever break this story. I'm not even certain how they did this. And it may be, though, that they're such weirdos. They might be taunting everybody. And they love to troll and say, who knows whether there's even are the 20 emails. They might even be interested in trolling and just telling people, well, there are 20 that we're just never going to turn over to you. And that infuriates the other side, and they're supposed to be entitled to it, and how dare you, and the law is the law, and nobody's above the law, and we're going to sue and sue and sue and sue and lose, or I guess the plaintiffs win, the government loses, the government appeals anyway. There's baseless appeal, but who cares, because they appointed all the appeals court judges, so they get a hearing and they lose there too somehow, and then they're off to the Supreme Court. They drag this out over and over in any number of contexts and situations, but here they could do it in the FOIA context and then lose that and then say, well, all right, guess what? There never really were any 20 emails after all, and then we have to sue them over that. Why did you say that? Now, that can't be true. Right? And by the time we get through all of this stuff, of course, they're out of office, and then they're depending on our our belief that, well, if they're out of office, who cares anymore? Let's move on. Let's look to the future. Let's give everybody half health care coverage or whatever it is. It's better than nothing. We all understand that. I don't need to have that fight right now. White House withholds 20 emails between two Trump aides on Ukraine aid. Let's find out why and whether we believe it's really true. Subheader says it contends the release of the documents sought by the Times, and that's why they're mad about it, would inhibit the frank and candid exchange of views in government decision-making. This is very frequently the crux of even legitimate FOIA fights. This comes up in the context of executive privilege all the time. All right, let's take a look at this. The Trump administration disclosed on Friday, that's why we didn't get a chance to read about it, that there were 20 emails between a top aide to President Trump's acting, oh yes, we need to use that again, his acting chief of staff, and a colleague at the White House's Office of Management and Budget discussing the freeze of a congressionally mandated military aid package for Ukraine. So right off the bat, we are talking about the same exchanges that we read about on Friday in unredacted form. The stuff that turned out to be relatively damning in unredacted form, there's worse material that they just simply said, to hell with you and FOIA, you're not getting it. But in response to a court order that it swiftly processed those pages in response to a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, they note for us, lawsuit filed by the New York Times, the Office of Management and Budget delivered a terse letter saying it would not turn over any of the 40 pages of emails, not even with redactions. All 20 documents are being withheld in full, wrote Dayon Hardy, the office's Freedom of Information Act officer. The Times Information Act request sought email messages between Robert Blair, a top aide to Mr. Trump's you-know-what, acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, and Michael Duffy, both names we heard on Friday, an official at the White House's Office of Management and Budget, who was in charge of handling the process for releasing $391 million in weapons and security assistance Congress had appropriated to help Ukraine resist Russian aggression. Yes, and we have something to say about that as well. Side note, hearkening back to the minute or so of the actual Golden Globes Awards ceremony that I watched, besides what was sent to me or sent around on videotape, Ricky Gervais bashing everybody, was awards given out for the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. That made me think. And I don't remember, I wasn't watching closely enough. It was on in the background while I was taking care of, well, I can't tell you, national security. I was washing the dishes. But national security dishes, you see. And it was on in the background, and I heard the awards being accepted for Chernobyl, and a great point, or part of a point made, and I don't know whether he intended to go this far with the point, but he did, whoever it was, and I say that knowing that it was probably a very famous person, and I don't mean to, downplay their importance to the world of entertainment, or the rest of the world for that matter, but pointing out that the disaster at Chernobyl was something that could have been a lot worse. It was terrible as it was, but it held out the possibility of enormous, lingering environmental impact for the entire world, and perhaps almost all of humanity, or the vast bulk of humanity. It might have limited its effects to the northern hemisphere, possibly, had they not acted to mitigate it. And they didn't do wasn't a perfect job. That was the point of the series. But the series also made clear the fact that the people on the ground there who tried to contain the disaster, in many cases, gave their lives to do so that the environmental impact wouldn't spread around the entire globe and across all humanity. And it was a really remarkable thing, and it was a great look in that series, if you didn't get a chance to see it, at the humanity of that, as best as we can do in television form within the context of an hour or so of someone's attention, to bring to their attention the fact that people unknown to them, who might even have been considered enemies at that time, nonetheless sacrificed themselves for the greater good. I'm sure they thought, perhaps they were told that it was for the greater good of the Soviet Union, and that was enough for them. But the reality is that it was on behalf of all humanity. And thanks. And the guy accepting the award saying, the brunt of this disaster fell on the people of Ukraine and Belarus, which is what perked my ears up, Ukraine and Belarus, because of course, and he didn't get to this point. I don't know if he meant to get to this point, but it is interesting to bring up now in our context that yes, they did sacrifice a lot for the rest of the world in Ukraine and Belarus, and now we're sort of leaving them hanging at the mercy of an expansionist Russia behind a corrupt Putin. And maybe we owe them a debt of some kind. That might be not a bad time to make the call for assistance to them. We've mentioned Belarus in passing, and we didn't get to the bottom of it when we did mention it, but I wanted to put that out there as a marker. As it turns out, long-ish story, short-ish on Belarus is Russia is pressing Belarus essentially to surrender its sovereignty as an independent nation and politically merge back into Russia. And Belarus, I suppose, is in more precarious condition with respect to its dependence on Russia for fuel than Ukraine is. Ukraine has a few more options and maybe some more money at their disposal than Belarus does. Belarus appears to be more or less at their mercy, and it's not entirely clear what the populace actually would want to do with respect to merger with Russia, but it's hard to believe that they would be amenable to it. But who knows? I don't know what the situation on the ground there is, but they appear to be pressuring the government, and I guess at least some of the people, into believing it would be a welcome relief versus the pressure they're facing at getting the fuel that they need to keep everything, to keep people alive during the winter, to keep the economy going, etc. So an interesting point not quite made during the Golden Globes, that to the extent we feel any obligation to the people of Ukraine and Belarus, it might be worth our while to consider whether, if they want to remain free and independent of Russia, we might help with that, as opposed to, say, withholding aid so that they can't do that. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled story about withholding aid to Ukraine. Right, all 20 documents, all additional emails, not even being redacted, just withheld in full, according to the Freedom of Information Act officer for the OMB. The Times' Information Act request, of course, had sought email messages between Robert Blair at the White House and Michael Duffy at OMB, which is also an arm of the White House. So really kind of executive branch, executive office of the president to EOP to EOP. So, remember the $391 million in weapons and security assistance that Congress had appropriated to help Ukraine resist Russian aggression. In her letters, Ms. Hardy, that's the FOIA officer at OMB, Ms. Hardy cited exemptions to FOIA for correspondence involving the president's staff and internal policy deliberations, suggesting that the disclosure of this material would inhibit the frank and candid exchange of views that is necessary for effective government decision-making. David McCraw, a lawyer for The Times, said the newspaper would challenge the blanket withholding of the documents and would ask the judge overseeing the lawsuit, Judge Amy Berman Jackson, whose name should be familiar to you. She also was overseeing, I think, the Roger Stone trial, if I'm not mistaken, but I get these things mixed up from time to time. Anyway, so the Times is going to ask Judge Jackson to approve an expedited schedule for briefs and arguments given the urgent public interest in learning more about the dispute. Remember, they've impeached the president about this, and we're under great pressure to begin the trial. That brings me to another subject, but let's get through this first. The heart of the accusation against Trump is, of course, that he abused his official powers, including withholding a promised White House meeting and congressionally mandated military aid in an attempt to coerce Ukraine's president into announcing investigations that could deliver personal political benefits to Mr. Trump. Let's see. So, note to self about the next subject, if I can remember what my note means when we're done. In October, that's where we left off. In October, the Democratic-led House Intelligence Committee had also subpoenaed the Office of Management and Budget for all Ukraine-related documents, but the White House refused to produce them. It also instructed several key current and former officials with inside knowledge of the episode not to testify. Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, has portrayed Blair and Duffy as two of the four key witnesses he believes the Senate should call in Trump's impeachment trial, along with Mulvaney and Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, of course. McConnell, and as the majority leader, has expressed opposition, of course, to calling witnesses at all, and again criticized the House investigation on Friday, and we don't really care what he had to say about that one. The Trump administration's move to withhold all the emails in full, not even disclosing the dates they were sent or the shape of the paragraphs covered by black lines, is a step beyond its heavy censorship of a related set of emails it released in response to another FOIA lawsuit brought by the Center for Public Integrity. The documents released to the center consisted of about 300 pages of emails between OMB and the Pentagon about Ukraine, while the officially released versions were heavily redacted and the center is contesting the censorship and further litigation. The visible portions showed, among other things, that Pentagon officials had worried that holding the funds could be an illegal impoundment. A report on Thursday by the legal policy website Just Security added further fuel to the controversy by revealing what was under some, but not all, of the deletions. The website said it had been shown some of the emails in unredacted form, including an August 30th message from Duffy to a Pentagon budget official stating that there was, quote, clear direction from POTUS. You know who POTUS is, but they go on to explain that, to continue to hold the Ukraine military assistance. The Times separately reported this week that Mr. Blair warned Mr. Mulvaney to expect Congress to become unhinged if the White House went ahead and with the hold on the aid. Earlier on Friday, Schumer went to the Senate floor to praise the reporting of the Times, the Center for Public Integrity and Justice Security, as an additional reason for the Senate, as part of Trump's trial, to seek documents and testimony that the White House had blocked House impeachment investigators from obtaining. What constituted clear direction? Mr. Schumer asked. Did he get an order from the president, or did someone like Mr. Mulvaney get an order from the president passed on to Mr. Duffy? Was there discussion among officials about covering up for the president in delay of military assistance? These are questions that can only be answered by examination of the documentary evidence and by testimony of key Trump administration officials under oath in the Senate trial. At least 4 collections of emails have now been released or shared with reporters, detailing correspondence between White House officials and their counterparts at the Office of Management and Budget or the Defense Department. Overall, these exchanges show growing tension between the White House and the Pentagon in late August and early September, as Defense Department officials questioned if they would be able to spend all the congressionally appropriated military aid to Ukraine before the deadline at the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. So a good recap of where we were on Friday, with the additional information that there are 20 emails that they just say, F you can't have them. Although, again, why they aren't trying to just destroy them entirely, or maybe they're working on it, I really don't know. I mean, I don't recommend it. It's illegal also, maybe worse. But, one, prior Republican administrations, anyway, have gotten away with it. See the destruction of the CIA's torture tapes in the George W. Bush administration. That, of course, came crashing down around the head of Gina Haspel, who was later promoted to director of the CIA. So, whatever. But we don't tend to punish those things. We just don't. Interesting exchange over the weekend with Karen Tumulty and a few others about how, what do we say about this? How ineffective Congress has been in advocating on its own account as against the executive branch on questions like this. It just keeps getting stymied, and the only remedy available to it is impeachment. And we're seeing right now what value impeachment has or has not got when the president's party is committed to valuing party over country. You're just not going to be able to hold the executive branch to account, and that's going to hurt the branch you're serving in. But right now you're winning, so who cares? I mean, that's really just been the Republican attitude on this for a long time. But Karen's not quite as free to say that, and probably doesn't even believe it in the same way that we do. But we're free to say it. So speaking of Republicans in Congress, today being Monday, I guess we should be watching closely to see if Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, and or Mitch McConnell ever follow through on their big threats. Josh Hawley spent a good portion of the weekend whining and complaining that the articles of impeachment haven't been delivered from the House to the Senate, and what an outrageous delay it was. They spent an awful lot of time. That was clearly a talking point issue for Republicans over the last couple of days, and I imagine they'll just turn up the volume now. But Hawley was tweeting over the weekend. I guess I should just scroll way back and see if I can find some of those things. I don't know whether he really needs to be quoted verbatim in all this, but he, I don't know, maybe Saturday came up with the scheme that because the articles hadn't been delivered and that was getting under the skin of President Trump and everybody else. I mean, I imagine that's what's motivating this, all or some of this, is that it's driving the president crazy, and maybe them too. Republicans want to get to burying the impeachment already, and they have become convinced through really some rather brilliant public relations handling of this situation on the House side under Nancy Pelosi they've become convinced that this is something they have to argue and fight about and threaten to do something about, that she hasn't sent these articles of impeachment over. Not to undermine the value of what she's after and what she's been able to accomplish with next to nothing in terms of, aces up her sleeve on this. But the reality is that, there really hasn't been anything, no significant delays of any kind in all of this, and people forget it. I guess because of the way we're used to these fast-moving news cycles these days, it seems like forever since Trump's been impeached. When are they going to do something about it? When is this trial going to start? They keep going back and forth about whether there's going to be witnesses or not. And every day you wait, there's more reason to believe that the witnesses are absolutely necessary to, in order to have anything resembling a fair trial in the Senate. So that just increases the pressure for giving way and allowing witnesses and possibly endangering the president's tenure in office if you believe that, there's any possibility that the truth will change Republican senators' minds. But even if you don't, it's certainly the case that they understand that it would be embarrassing to have all of this information come out and remain unwilling to do anything about it. So they want to get to burying the impeachment as soon as possible. So Josh Hawley spent a portion of the weekend insisting that this has gone on too long and he's got the fix for it. And he's going to, as he put it, he's going to file a motion of some kind, make a motion that either the impeachment case be dismissed or that the rules be changed so that they don't have to wait for the articles of impeachment. But whatever it is, he's got it in his mind that this needs to be pushed along forward, and he's got to do something about making that happen. Now, the reality is, I will just remind all of you who didn't see me tweeting over the weekend about it, perhaps, keep in mind that the articles of impeachment were adopted on December 18th in the House. On December 19th, the Senate went into recess through the end of the year, and they're only just now returning for normal business sessions this week. So at the time that Hawley was making this complaint, the Senate hadn't been in session for business for weeks, from December 19th through January 3rd or 4th when he was tweeting about this stuff. Not that it stopped him, but that's the background of it. You should keep in mind that as soon as the articles of impeachment were passed, the Senate ran from D.C. and hasn't been back since. So what's with all the impatience? And the attempt here is to accuse Democrats of playing games with impeachment. And if there's any game being played, it's being played by the people who ran away from the trial and haven't been on hand. And he's been, at home with his family, rightfully so, during the holiday break, enjoying their company. I'm sure talking to constituents, he's a jackass and a moron, but he was, I'm sure, enjoying himself with his family and his constituents in the way that jackasses and morons might do. I'm not sure I understand those methods, but, you could probably explain them to me inside of half an hour or so. I just like Donald Trump can learn everything there is to know about nuclear weapons that quickly, so can I learn what a moron would do with in conversation with constituents over the holiday break. But the point is, he and none of the other senators were here. They would never contemplated holding the trial this soon. It was always the case, even before it was decided that the articles of impeachment would be withheld for any amount of time, and we don't know how long they will be withheld. And it may be over, that they've decided to hand them over. It might be this week, but nothing was set to start before today. I think very early on, Chuck Schumer said, about the week of the 6th of January, you can expect that we'll start to have some discussions on the floor and start setting the calendar for motions to begin discussions and eventually get to a vote on what ground rules we were going to adopt for the trial. and that the trial could, if things go smoothly, perhaps we could extend the invitation to the House managers to schedule time to present their case the next week. Not that the case would be presented the next week, but that rather we would extend the invitation to House managers to tell us when they will present the case. And we will extend that invitation sometime next week, and then they might come right away. They might come in 2 weeks. We'll have to see what amount of time they think they want to prepare their case. It was at no point was it ever contemplated that they were going to start this thing. Certainly not during the winter break, the holiday break, the Christmas, Merry Christmas. They're saying Christmas again, except they're canceling Christmas for a trial. I don't think so. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've had a look back in the Twitter timeline, and I'm convinced that more of the information we really want to focus on, maybe in the last segment, exists in the timeline rather than in Pocket. Though there are some long reads we definitely have to get to, but maybe we can use Wednesday's pause for that. And as it turns out, Josh Hawley was tweeting his urgent memos to us on January 2nd. So that would have been Thursday of last week. And I'm surprised we didn't get to it on Friday. But there was so much else going on and assassinations to attend to that I can see why we might not have gotten around to it. But yeah, Josh Hawley was tweeting about this on the 2nd. This despite the fact that on January 1st, of course, he was tweeting pictures of himself hanging out around campfires down in Missouri. So not exactly urgent after all. But yes, I thought I would remind everybody of that and the fact that, so Hawley's tweet was, Dems said impeachment was urgent, and he capitalizes all the letters in urgent. Now they don't want to have a trial, which is not actually true, because they have no evidence, which is also not true. In real world, meaning the real world, if prosecution doesn't proceed with a case, it gets dismissed. So on Monday, I will introduce measure, I'm sure he meant a measure, to dismiss this bogus impeachment for lack of prosecution. And a theme that apparently was picked up on by noted legal authority and judge for 10 seconds, Jeanine Pirro, who likewise insisted to actually a kind of a smirking Kevin McCarthy, who I think knew, even as she was saying it, yeah, it doesn't really work like that. But listening to her rant and rave, both of them say that the thing is this enormous delay is a admission by the House that they have no case and they refuse to go forward, and we should just dismiss the case because in the real world, if there's a huge delay and the prosecution can't move forward, the defense can sometimes get the case dismissed. I'm sure, by the way, that conservative judge of the year, by the way, Jeanine Pirro, was constantly dismissing criminal indictments that were handed up the day or the week before Christmas, but if they hadn't been prosecuted by New Year's, dismissed, right? Sorry, no can do. You can't indict somebody the week before Christmas, and if you haven't started the trial before New Year's, we dismiss. I'm sure she was definitely doing that all the time because she was such a skeptic of prosecutors in her day, right? But keep in mind, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And not only that, but of course, they passed those articles. The Senate ghosted. And now, December or January 2nd, they're like, what the hell's the delay about here? I don't know. But apparently that's enough. A senator says a thing. Reporters report that a senator says a thing. And now here we are. And it's the circus that Josh Hawley is complaining about. This will expose Dems' circus for what it is. A fake impeachment, abuse of the Constitution based on no evidence. If Dems won't proceed with trial, bogus articles should be dismissed and Donald Trump fully cleared. You know, what's the circus going on here? What's fake in all this is Hawley's impatience. He was just fine leaving town and kicking back for a couple of weeks. And then when he started to get anxious about coming back, he realized, hey, it feels like it's been a long time, even though it hasn't. I should just complain and see if people believe me, even though they shouldn't. So, maybe I should file a motion. Why not? I'm not a member of the Senate, but who cares? I mean, after all, Donald Trump can give legal governmental orders via Twitter. So can I, right? My proposal is we dock Josh Hawley for his pay for every day in which he said he was impatiently awaiting the start of the impeachment trial, but in fact was loafing around the house down in Missouri, which ordinarily I would say he was entitled to do, but because he's so jittery about this, I can only side with him and say, yes, that's right, and we're just going to have to dock you pay if you're that nervous about it. You should have been back in D.C. trying to make it happen, but you weren't. All right, let's see. Other things, we mentioned for you, of course, the fact that Trump, among his many lunatic tweets from the last day or so, and in addition to initially threatening war crimes and then doubling down on them on his on board Air Force One, I guess, on his way back to Washington, D.C. from his long break in Mar-a-Lago, where he was during the escalation to near global war / assassinating foreign dignitaries, etc. But he also wanted to let everybody know that, as he said in his tweet, these media posts, the tweets, I guess, will serve as notification. I don't know which ones. He tweeted some other crap, and he thinks they'll serve as notification to the United States Congress. It's important he talk about which legislature he's addressing, because we don't know what country he thinks he's running. But they will serve as notification to the United States Congress that should Iran strike any U.S. person or target, or should we lie about that, the United States will quickly and fully strike back, and perhaps in a disproportionate manner, which should likewise be a war crime. Such legal notice is not required, it is, but is given nonetheless via tweet somehow, because he declares it to be legal notice for the Congress that he tweets these things. But this brings up, about half a dozen horrific issues. The one which I'll focus on only because everybody else covered the others pretty well, and you probably surmised them pretty well for yourself. Maybe this one too, but I feel like it deserves a little time. Not that I think he'll be listening, but maybe, I don't know, through some miracle, one of you has the ear of, I don't know, the general counsel at Twitter. They need to talk to their CEO about this. In addition to Kamala Harris's increasingly prescient-looking call for banning Donald Trump from Twitter because of his constant abuse of their terms of service, does Twitter really want to be on the hook for being the purported official delivery method of governmental orders and legal notices? Because as crazy as it is for the account Real Donald Trump to be tweeting that this serves as notification and legal notice is not required, even though it is, although I suppose at some point in the near future we should expect this Supreme Court to strike down as unconstitutional the War Powers Act. But for the moment, legal notice is required. But he thinks, if it's perhaps true that Donald Trump thinks that it suffices legally to deliver notice via Twitter. And maybe it is, but in order to get to that place where it is considered legally binding, and I don't think we're at that place, but if we were to get there, you would object, of course, as you should in that context, although really I object to this in every context with Trump. I don't know that Donald Trump said that. It looks like Donald Trump said that. It's meant to look like Donald Trump said that. Donald Trump hasn't in any verifiable way disclaimed that he said that, nor has anyone else claimed to have been the one to say it on his behalf. But we do know that there are a number of people who have an access to his Twitter account, and he's said as much, and they've acknowledged as much. But even if he never had, we don't know anything about what happened here. All we have is a tweet. Now, what we do have is a tweet from a verified account, which is where I think the danger arises for the Twitter legal team. You're holding out to the rest of the world that your verifications, your verified status and your verification process means something here. The president says he's issuing orders. We're supposed to just pretend that we believe that it's him. You are in the middle of all this, not only delivering the message, but holding out to the world that you've done something that would provide proof, if necessary, that this was in fact the president speaking. I don't know, by the way, does it violate? Probably for celebrities there are different terms of service in a way. I don't know whether the terms of service forbid you from pretending to be someone else or something like that, or taking over a verified account. I don't know whether they've gotten that far. But the point is, at some point, the president is going to think he ordered something, and there's going to be a lawsuit over it. Either people saying that's not a legal order, or it was an illegal order, even if it was validly given, or we need to trace the evidence here that establishes that the president himself really did give this order. There's only one person empowered to give this order. Did he give it? And that's going to mean subpoenas to Twitter. That's going to mean Twitter in court, or possibly in front of Congress, right where Mark Zuckerberg was as a result of his own Facebook disasters over the past, in the past election and over the past couple of years. Google executives, Facebook executives will tell you they did not relish their appearances before Congress, I'm sure. They don't like being in court all the time. Twitter's probably in court all the time anyway, but now they'll be in court answering subpoenas and having counsel put pointed questions to them about whether or not they can prove, for purposes of, in a criminal case, beyond a reasonable doubt or what have you, depending on what's being tried here, but for varying levels of evidentiary requirements, can they provide proof that this was the person who they said it was, that person in fact was behind the keyboard, which I don't think they can prove. But then the question, I guess, moves to that part of the inquiry where we say, why are you holding out visually and otherwise, I guess, in your terms of service, that this is something that you verify? I mean, you award that. It's meant to look like you've awarded this check mark, when whatever it's supposed to mean, whatever it's supposed to be wrapped up in that, comes from you. Twitter is holding out that we've verified that this is the president. Can you tell us why you think it was? Or can you tell us that there's no way for you to know, and so your verified checkmark things, I mean, that might be the easiest way out legally. Your verification process and the checkmarks mean nothing, and that would be fine, and it might have some legal implications for some other cases elsewhere, I don't know, but probably not as important as this one. So it would be fine to jettison the whole thing, but you're going to be in a very uncomfortable position. In addition to which, I guess if he's ordering war crimes, you certainly don't want to find yourself in a military court having to answer to the judge advocate general whether or not, Twitter verifies its users to the extent that it could be considered a valid channel for a legally binding military order. You're going to want out of this. And one way to handle it is to dismantle your verification systems entirely and just give up on verifying anybody. I don't know if you're going to want to do that. Another way to do it, though, I will say that probably the least disruptive way of doing it is to give the people what they want and just say, you know what? The president just can't use this service this way. And not only that, he can't be trusted to use the service properly. So he just can't use the service. One guy. No. It's not like you're cutting him off from access to the media. The president of the United States is the most empowered person in the world with respect to finding microphones. Don't worry about it. You're not going to do him any damage. He'll sue you, but you're not going to be able to lay your hands on anything, I don't think, as president. Entitlement to this platform is not going to go anywhere as a claim, especially if you've abused it as much as he has. But I just as legal advice, despite the fact that other people say, oh, well, it's a violation of the terms of service, and so therefore you're a hypocrite if you allow him to continue. I don't think Jack cares about being a hypocrite, in this case anyway. Maybe in no case. I don't know anything about the guy. But the idea that I think would possibly move him is the amount of legal trouble he could be putting himself in by continuing to convey this kind of information for somebody who may or may not be the president of the United States. I think there's a lot of problems involved in that. All right. Let's see. Boy, there's a lot of other things that happened over the last couple days of last week. And more. Here's more about Josh Hawley. I was wondering, by the way, why on January 2nd did he say he was going to wait until January 6th to do this urgent thing? There was a pro forma session of Congress in the evening of January 2nd. Why could he not have introduced his motion then and deferred action on it, of course, until they were back in session this week? But the urgency seemed to argue for his making an attempt to introduce it that night. But of course, one of the reasons, of course, was he wasn't in Washington, D.C. He was sitting on a couch in Missouri, perhaps, depending on, on what part of the state. But, once again, it didn't have much to do with reality, what he was threatening. Let's see. Other things that happened over the last couple of days that I thought were worthy of mention. Let's see. More about Hawley. I guess that was getting reported the following day. Then there was Marco Rubio getting cornered by the veterans. We did discuss that one on Friday. Let's see. I don't know. And I feel like I'm skipping over a couple of other things. Somebody dug up the very fun 2011 Vine video of Donald Trump insisting that President Obama was in such electoral trouble going into 2012 that he would probably start a war with Iran because he felt it was his only chance to rally people to his side in 2012, that he could win the election that way. And projection, once again, and interesting to watch, but not news in that sense necessarily. Let's see. Then, that all happened actually Friday before our show was done, because I see that there are things that we discussed that happened afterwards, which is chock full of news in the last couple of days. Let me keep scrolling here, because there were so many things I opened up and kept to the side and we didn't get around to. Maybe next up one thing that occurred to me over the weekend was, as I was listening to and finding out more information and reading with you on the air information about the Soleimani assassination, who he was and what he had done in his military career. His association, of course, with the Revolutionary Guard came up, and I said, I feel like there was something, and I think we may have even mentioned it on Friday. Wasn't there something about a rumor that was floating that the Revolutionary Guard had some involvement with the development and subsequent flop of a Trump-branded building in Azerbaijan? And the answer is yes, that did happen. That was something that was floating out there, and I have since seen people bring it up over the weekend. I went and checked it out, and by Saturday, or was Friday, yeah, I guess after the show on Friday, that occurred to me, and I went and looked it up, and I found the New Yorker piece about the Azerbaijan tower, and that is of some considerable interest. And I did see some people tweeting about it over the weekend and making some connections. And let me see if I can't scroll a little further forward to when people were making mention of it, and we can bring up that story. Is there more? I think there might be some newer reporting on it, not just rehashing the old New Yorker article. But I think, long story short, on the New Yorker article was they never did, I don't think, open that tower as a Trump, maybe as nothing. They never may have opened that tower. But yeah, okay, Adam Davidson, who I think wrote the original piece, eventually, in fact, made the same realization. And I think he's responsible for the New Yorker piece. And he tweeted on Saturday, Soleimani oversaw Iran Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, effort to avoid sanctions / acquire WMD by using front companies. Very few American business people would work with these fronts and their schemes, but the Trump organization did, knowingly, right through the 2016 election, and then referencing his own article about it. In fact, I think he had a series of tweets on it, which started out, as I recall, hinting that, maybe Soleimani deserved assassination for his efforts to help Iran acquire WMD. But it sort of did take that weird twist, like, well, okay, but how was he trying to help them acquire WMD? And the answer is by making illegal purchases on the black market and laundering the money that was used to do it. And how would you do that? And as it turns out, it was through a deal with the Trump organization. That seems awfully weird, which led to a couple of interesting observations, including one that I think I did actually pocket, now that I think about it. But somebody made the observation that one of the ironies, maybe it was the Horse Whisperer, maybe I didn't pocket it, but we'll see if we can't find that that tweet too. But the observation being the irony of the accusation here. Oh, yes, all right. He was responding to Trump's complaints about, Obama was so weak on Iran that he gave them billions of dollars, right? The pallets of cash that were put on an airplane and flown back to Iran when they signed the terrible, terrible Iran nuclear deal with the United States, right? Huge talking point for Republicans. They love harping on that. Yes, we all know by now, I think, that was their money. It wasn't money we gave them. We didn't bribe them into doing this thing. We gave them back assets that had been frozen because they were illegally seeking nuclear weapons. And once they guaranteed that they wouldn't, we no longer had justification for holding onto these frozen assets. We returned the assets to them. So not only did we, but why, I guess the question, why did we send pallets and pallets of cash, a plane load of cash back to the Iranians, even if it was their money and we were returning it to them? why not do it electronically? But the very interesting observation here was that the irony of the accusation was that Obama's sanctions against Iran had so effectively cut off Iran's ability to engage in international business and international banking and financial transactions that it simply wouldn't work to make an electronic transaction with them or electronic transfer of funds to them. They aren't capable of receiving it that way because they had been so effectively cut off from the modern world economy. The cash had to be returned that way, actually physically returned. Nobody wanted to fly that over there, I'm sure. But it couldn't be done electronically because of how effective Obama's sanctions had been. So that was a very interesting claim as well, but also related to the fact that they would have to engage in money laundering in order to raise the hard currency they needed to fund their continued hunt for WMD. And apparently the one willing international partner that they could find in all of this was the Trump organization, who was dumb enough to say, yeah, sure, building a Trump-branded tower in Baku, Azerbaijan, with one of the most notoriously corrupt government officials in the country. And gosh, aren't we worried about corruption in the former Soviet republics, right? Trump couldn't wait to jump in with that one. And apparently this is one that he handed over to Ivanka to run. It was her job to get this thing off the ground. And as it turns out, they never got anywhere. And I don't think that they ever even actually were able to open the building. But very interesting thoughts about the extent of international money laundering. Not just Russians knew that the Trump organization was open to that kind of corruption because it was the only way they were making their money those days. But it was clear to the Iranians as well, even though it would have been the Iranian Republican Guard and presumably General Soleimani in some capacity behind the money here. But Trump pretended that they didn't know who it was, and I'm just dealing with the Azerbaijanis, and they're a government, right? So it's got to be on the up and up. And who cares if it was, he's like the transport minister that the guy was the partner in this, multi-million-dollar building, who should have been earning something like $90,000 a year as transport minister, somehow had access to millions of dollars and could co-invest in this property that not only was fully corrupt, but never actually even opened. Just thought that was an interesting observation to make along the way. And of course, now running out of time for today, there are so many more issues that we can set up for tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see if we can't, maybe we can blurt some of these things out on tape and get ready for a Wednesday program and share all of maybe corruption can be the focus of that one. If things are still on track, it has been some time since we penciled this in, but I'll check in and see whether Ian Reifowitz is still on as our penciled in calendars would indicate for a discussion tomorrow. We'll check in on that story, I guess perhaps this afternoon, and see if we can't arrange to bring him in for discussion. I can't even imagine how what he might have planned on discussing could have changed over the weekend with the president openly insisting on and doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on threats of war crimes. So we'll check in on that one. And again, like I said, we'll be back on the air live come Thursday, but Wednesday takes us out of action again. But maybe we'll call it Corruption Wednesday at this point. Oh, we got the wrong music rolling. We mean to have this music rolling. And in my excitement to move the mouse over to this music's button, I overzealously grabbed onto that mouse and accidentally discharged it over the break music. But that's not what we intend to do. But we did intend to tell you about what was up next and switch over here. Come on, Skype, wake up. like you've been asleep for the last couple minutes here, about what's coming up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Let's take a look at what he's got online. And now today I've left lots of time to discuss this, and this would, of course, be the day that Justice said, you know what, I'm going to try and make the description more concise. So let's get through it, shall we? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe. Bombing cultural sites in Iran, quote, would constitute a grave war crime, unquote. This we know, but it deserves more discussion. Can't be too much on that subject. Then on the rest of the menu, 20 states ask the Supreme Court to protect Obamacare again. More and more toxic waste sites are being ignored under Trump. And another House Republican is added to the more than 24 who now won't seek re-election in 2020. After the break, we move on to the Chef's Table, where the Swiss oppose a referendum campaign launched by the far right to end the free movement of citizens from the European Union. Very interesting. The Swiss far right.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
There's more, by the way. Let's see. Kane Tanaka has extended her record, I hope I pronounced that right, as the world's oldest person by celebrating her 117th birthday in southern Japan, because that's where she's from. All that and more, of course, on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef de Cuisine Justice Putnam next. Bon appetit.